The tears staining the parchment had long since dried, but the words remained as raw and painful as the moment Felicity Lawson's trembling hand penned them. She stood on the auction block, the Wyoming Territory sun beating down mercilessly on her uncovered head, the letter clutched in her fingers, the last connection to a life that had crumbled into dust. It was 1876, and in the frontier town of Laramie, Wyoming, Felicity had become nothing more than property to be sold to the highest bidder. Adam Quincy watched from the edge of the crowd, his weathered Stetson pulled low over piercing blue eyes. His gaze wasn't on the auctioneer's animated gestures or the gathering of rough men eyeing the woman like she was livestock. Instead, he studied her face, proud despite the humiliation, beautiful despite the circumstances that had brought her here. $500 for the woman. A portly gentleman called out, eliciting murmurs from the crowd. Papers say she's educated, can keep books and manage a household. The auctioneer, a weasel of a man with tobacco-stained teeth, grinned. $500 for the lady, do I hear 6? Felicity flinched at each call, each bid tearing away another piece of her dignity. The letter in her hand, her final goodbye to a brother who would never receive it, was all she had left of herself. 24 years of life reduced to this moment, to be bartered away to settle her late husband's gambling debts. $800, came a slurred voice from Felicity's right. It belonged to Barton Wilkes, owner of the town's most notorious saloon. His reputation for cruelty toward his investments was well known throughout the territory. Felicity's eyes widened in horror. She would rather die than be claimed by such a man. $1,000, Adam called out clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed crowd. He stepped forward, spurs jingling against the packed earth. Wilkes turned, fury etching his flushed features. "Quincy," he spat, "this ain't your affair." Adam ignored him, meeting Felicity's gaze instead. Something passed between them, not pity, which she would have despised, but understanding. "Going once at $1,000, the auctioneer called, excitement elevating his voice at the unexpected bidding war. $1,200, Wilkes countered, eyes narrowed. Adam didn't hesitate. $2,000. The sum was staggering enough to buy prime grazing land or a decent-sized herd of cattle. The crowd gasped collectively. Felicity's fingers tightened around her letter, wrinkling the already tear-stained paper. $2,000 going once, twice. Sold to Adam Quincy. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a decisive crack. Adam approached the platform while the crowd dispersed, most casting curious glances back at the cowboy, who'd spent a fortune on a widow with nothing but the clothes on her back and a letter in her hand. "Madam," he said simply, offering his hand to help her down. Felicity hesitated, studying the man who now owned her. He was tall, broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. Unlike the other men, his gaze remained respectfully on her face. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one deserves to be sold," he replied. "Least of all someone holding onto words like they're more precious than gold." She glanced down at the crumpled letter in her hand, then back at him. Cautiously, she placed her fingers in his calloused palm and stepped down. As they walked away from the auction block, Adam noticed how she clutched the letter, how her entire body seemed to curve protectively around it. "You don't need to fear me taking that from you," he said quietly as they approached his wagon. "It's all I have left," Felicity replied, her voice stronger now that they were away from the crowd. "My final goodbye to my brother Thomas. He's in Boston. He doesn't even know what's happened." Adam helped her onto the wagon seat with a gentleness that belied his strength. "You won't be writing any more goodbyes, Mrs. Lawson, not while you're under my protection." "Protection?" She looked at him with confusion. "Sir, I know what you paid. I know what's expected. Nothing is expected, he interrupted firmly. I bought your contract to free you from it, not to enforce it. For the first time since he'd seen her on that auction block, something like hope flickered in Felicity's eyes. I don't understand. Adam clicked his tongue, urging the horses forward. My ranch is half a day's ride from town. I need help there, honest work with fair pay. My housekeeper, Mrs. Caldwell, has been after me for months to find an educated woman to help with the books and correspondence. He glanced at her. The choice is yours. You can stay and work, earning your way to independence, or I can provide you with enough money to leave on the next stage coach. Felicity stared at him, searching for deceit and finding none. Why would you do this for a stranger? Adam was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Because 8 years ago my sister was sold to settle a debt. I wasn't there to stop it. The muscles in his jaw tightened. I never saw her again. Felicity's heart ached at the pain evident in his profile. I'm sorry, she whispered. He nodded once, acknowledgement of her sympathy without inviting further discussion. So, Mrs. Lawson, what will it be? The stage-coach or the ranch? She looked down at the letter in her hand, the last connection to her past. Then she looked at the road stretching before them, leading into the unknown. The ranch, she said finally. I've had enough of goodbyes. As they traveled, Felicity learned that Adam's ranch, the Diamond Q, sprawled across 3,000 acres of Wyoming's finest grazing land. He'd built it from nothing after returning from the war, a former Union cavalry officer who'd sought peace in the vastness of the Western Territories. It's not what most would call comfortable, Adam warned as they crested a hill in the late afternoon. But it's honest and it's mine. Below them stretched a valley, emerald with spring grass, bisected by a silver ribbon of river. The ranch house sat nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills, smoke curling from its chimney. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the verdant slopes. It's beautiful, Felicity breathed, the first genuine smile lifting the corners of her mouth. Adam studied her profile, noticing how the setting sun burnished her chestnut hair with gold. It suits some, he said quietly. Drives others mad with the silence. After the noise of my husband's creditors pounding on our door, silence sounds like heaven, she replied. As they approached the ranch house, a sturdy woman with iron-gray hair emerged from the door, wiping her hands on her apron. 3 border collies raced ahead of the wagon, barking a welcome. Mrs. Caldwell, Adam called as he drew the wagon to a halt. We have a guest. The housekeeper's shrewd eyes took in Felicity's travel-worn appearance and the way she clutched the letter. Without a word, she marched up to the wagon. About time you brought someone with sense to this place, she declared, offering Felicity a weathered hand. Come along, dear. You look like you could use a hot meal and a bath. Felicity glanced uncertainly at Adam, who nodded encouragingly. Mrs. Caldwell runs the house. What she says goes. Damn right it does, the older woman affirmed, helping Felicity down. And what I say is this young woman needs tending to before she drops from exhaustion. The books can wait until tomorrow. Adam watched as Mrs. Caldwell led Felicity toward the house, noting the way the younger woman's shoulders had begun to droop with fatigue now that they'd reached safety. The letter remained clutched in her hand, a talisman she couldn't bring herself to release. Put her in the blue room, he called after them. It gets the morning sun. Mrs. Caldwell waved acknowledgement without turning around, already chattering about hot water and fresh linens. Later that night, after the household had retired, Adam sat on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The spring air carried the scent of pine and new grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. He thought of the woman sleeping under his roof, of the letter she'd guarded so fiercely, and of the fear in her eyes when Wilkes had bid for her. He'd recognized that fear, had seen it in his sister's face the day they'd taken her away. "Not this time," he murmured to the darkness, a promise to himself as much as to Felicity Lawson. Dawn broke clear and cool over the Diamond Q, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Felicity woke disoriented, momentarily panicked by the unfamiliar surroundings until memories of the previous day filtered through the fog of sleep. The auction block, the cowboy's unexpected intervention, the long journey to this ranch, it all came flooding back. She sat up, running her fingers through her tangled hair. Mrs. Caldwell had provided a clean nightgown and promised to find suitable day clothes. But for now, Felicity had only what she'd been wearing when she was taken from her home in Laramie. On the bedside table lay her letter, carefully smoothed out overnight. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Yes, it's Mrs. Caldwell, dear. I've brought some clothes that might suit you and hot water for washing." Felicity wrapped the quilt around herself and opened the door. The housekeeper bustled in, carrying a tray laden with a steaming pitcher, a basin, and a stack of neatly folded garments. "These belong to Mr. Quincy's mother," Mrs. Caldwell explained, setting down her burden. "They've been packed away for years, but they're clean and should fit you well enough until we can get proper measurements for new ones." Felicity ran her fingers over the simple cotton dresses and undergarments. They were plain but of good quality, far better than what she'd been wearing. "This is too generous." "Nonsense," the older woman scoffed. "They're no use to anyone gathering dust in a trunk. Now breakfast will be ready in half an hour. Mr. Quincy is already out with the men, but he asked that you join him in his office afterward to discuss your duties." After Mrs. Caldwell left, Felicity washed and dressed quickly. The blue calico dress was slightly loose but fit well enough once belted. She braided her hair and pinned it up, trying to create some semblance of propriety despite the circumstances. Before leaving the room, she carefully folded her letter and tucked it into her pocket. The paper was worn thin from constant handling, but she couldn't bear to part with it. The last words she'd written to Thomas, explaining her husband's death and the subsequent discovery of his massive debts, begging her brother for help that would come too late. The main part of the ranch house was simply furnished but immaculately kept. A large stone fireplace dominated the central room, with comfortable chairs arranged before it. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked for a frontier home. Mrs. Caldwell directed her to the dining room, where a hearty breakfast awaited. Felicity hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma of freshly baked bread and bacon reached her. She ate with more enthusiasm than decorum, earning an approving nod from the housekeeper. "Mr. Quincy's office is through that door," Mrs. Caldwell said when she'd finished. "He should be back shortly." Felicity waited in the small, cluttered room that served as the ranch's headquarters. Ledgers were stacked haphazardly on a massive oak desk, correspondence spilled from cubbyholes, and maps of the territory covered most of one wall. It was the office of a man too busy with the physical demands of ranching to properly attend to its paperwork. She couldn't resist opening one of the ledgers, her trained eye immediately spotting inconsistencies in the bookkeeping. Her late husband, for all his faults, had taught her the intricacies of accounting during their brief marriage. "Find anything interesting?" Adam's deep voice came from the doorway. Felicity jumped, nearly dropping the ledger. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. No need to apologize," he said, entering the room and removing his hat. His hair was damp with sweat, his face streaked with dust from the morning's work. "That's what I'm hoping you'll help with." He moved to the washstand in the corner, pouring water into the basin. "The ranch has grown faster than my ability to keep track of it all," he admitted, washing his face and hands. "Most days I'd rather be breaking horses than balancing books." Felicity watched him, noting the way he moved with an economy of motion, no gesture wasted. Everything about Adam Quincy spoke of self-discipline and hard work. "Your ledgers need reorganizing," she said, finding her voice. "You're not tracking expenses properly, and there's no systematic record of income." He dried his face with a towel, raising an eyebrow at her assessment. "That bad? It could be worse," she replied honestly. "But a ranch this size needs proper accounting if you want to know whether you're making or losing money." Adam nodded, taking a seat behind the desk. "That's why I need someone like you, Mrs. Lawson. Someone educated, someone who understands business." "Felicity," she said quietly. "Please call me Felicity. Mrs. Lawson reminds me of before." His eyes softened slightly. "Felicity, then. And I'm Adam to everyone except the hands who call me boss whether I like it or not." He outlined what he needed: organized accounts, regular correspondence with cattle buyers in Chicago and St. Louis, record keeping for the ranch's operations. The work would be demanding but not overwhelming. "In exchange," he continued, "you'll have room and board plus a salary of $30 a month." Felicity gasped. It was a generous sum, more than many men earned in the territory. "That's too much," she protested. "It's fair compensation for skilled work," Adam countered. "I don't believe in underpaying just because you're a woman. The money's yours to save, spend, or send to your brother in Boston." At the mention of her brother, Felicity's hand instinctively went to the letter in her pocket. "I don't even know if he's still there," she admitted. "This was meant to be my goodbye. By the time Edward's creditors were finished, there wasn't enough left for postage, let alone a ticket east." Adam studied her for a moment. "We can send a telegram to Boston inquiring after him if you'd like." Hope fluttered in Felicity's chest. "You would do that, first chance we get," he promised. "For now, though, there's work to be done. Are you up to starting today?" Felicity straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I'd like that." And so began her new life at the Diamond Q. The days fell into a rhythm: mornings spent organizing Adam's chaotic records, afternoons helping Mrs. Caldwell with household matters, evenings often passed in the comfortable chairs before the fireplace, Adam reading aloud from one of his books while Felicity mended or knitted. She learned about the ranch's operations, about the 30 men who worked the land and tended the cattle. She came to know the seasons by the work they brought: spring calving, summer grazing, fall roundups, winter feeding. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the Diamond Q became home. 2 weeks after her arrival, Adam returned from Laramie with news. "I sent inquiries to Boston," he said, finding her in the garden where she'd been helping Mrs. Caldwell plant vegetables. Felicity stood quickly, brushing dirt from her hands. And Adam's expression was gentle. "Your brother left Boston 3 years ago. The last anyone heard, he'd headed west to seek his fortune in the gold fields of California. The hope that had sustained her deflated like a punctured balloon." "I see," she said softly. "I've written to contacts in San Francisco," Adam continued. "If he's anywhere in California, we'll find him." Felicity nodded, grateful for his efforts even as disappointment washed over her. That night, she took out her tear-stained letter and read it again, wondering if Thomas would ever know what had happened to her, if he was even alive to care. A knock at her bedroom door roused her from melancholy thoughts. "Felicity?" Adam's voice was low, concerned. "Mrs. Caldwell said you didn't come down for supper." She hastily wiped her eyes and tucked the letter away. "I'm not hungry, thank you." There was a pause. "May I come in? Just to talk?" Propriety dictated she refuse. An unmarried woman alone with a man in her bedroom was scandalous by any standard. But this was Adam, who had rescued her from a fate worse than death, who had given her work and dignity when she had nothing. "Yes," she said finally. The door opened slowly. Adam stood uncertainly in the doorframe, still dressed in his work clothes, his expression a mixture of concern and awkwardness. "I'm sorry about your brother," he said simply. Felicity nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Adam crossed the room and sat beside her on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "When you lose someone," he said quietly, "or when you don't know if they're lost to you forever, it's like carrying a weight that never gets lighter. You just get stronger, learn to bear it better." She looked at him then, really looked at him. The lines around his eyes weren't just from squinting into the sun, they were carved by grief and worry. "Your sister," she murmured. He nodded, his gaze distant. "Elizabeth, she'd be 26 now. Sometimes I think I see her in town or hear her laugh on the wind, but it's never her." Without thinking, Felicity reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough with calluses, warm and strong around hers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. They sat in silence for a long moment, connected by shared loss. "The men are driving a small herd to Laramie tomorrow," Adam said eventually. "I'll be going with them. Would you like to come along? We could visit the telegraph office, send more inquiries about Thomas." Felicity hesitated. The thought of returning to Laramie, where she'd been humiliated on the auction block, made her stomach churn with anxiety, but the chance to actively search for her brother. "Yes," she decided. "I would like that." Adam squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "We'll leave at first light. It's a hard day's ride, so wear something comfortable." As he rose to leave, Felicity impulsively called after him. "Adam," he turned, eyebrows raised in question. "Thank you, not just for this, but for everything." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "You're earning your keep, Felicity. You don't need to thank me." But they both knew it was more than that. In the weeks since he'd brought her to the Diamond Q, something had changed between them, a tentative friendship building on a foundation of mutual respect. The journey to Laramie the next day was dusty and tiring. Felicity rode astride, wearing a divided skirt Mrs. Caldwell had altered for her from one of Adam's mother's old riding habits. The ranch hands treated her with a curious respect, tipping their hats when she rode near, careful to mind their language in her presence. Adam stayed close, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the confident way he sat his horse, the respect his men accorded him, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. They reached Laramie by mid-afternoon, the cattle lowing in the stockyard while Adam completed his business with the buyer. Felicity, escorted by one of the older ranch hands named Hank, made her way to the telegraph office. "Send as many messages as you need, madam," Hank assured her, standing guard outside like a weathered sentinel. "Boss said to make sure you got whatever you wanted." Felicity composed telegrams to Sacramento, San Francisco, and several smaller mining communities, each with the same message. "Seeking Thomas Lawson, stop, left Boston 3 years ago, stop sister. Felicity seeks news, stop, reply Diamond Q Ranch, Laramie, Wyoming, stop." As she emerged from the telegraph office, a familiar and unwelcome voice called her name. Well, if it ain't Mrs. Lawson, looking mighty fine for a woman who was up for auction just weeks ago. Barton Wilkes leaned against a hitching post across the street, his bloodshot eyes roaming over her with undisguised lust. "Quincy getting his money's worth, is he?" Hank stepped in front of Felicity protectively. "Move along, Wilkes. Miss Felicity ain't interested in conversation." Wilkes sneered. "Miss Felicity." Is that what they're calling Quincy's whore these days? The slur hit Felicity like a physical blow. She'd known there would be talk a single woman living at a bachelor's ranch inevitably sparked gossip, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. "I am Mr. Quincy's bookkeeper," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "Nothing more." "Sure you are, honey." Wilkes spat tobacco juice onto the boardwalk. "And I'm the Queen of England." Hank's hand moved to his sidearm. "Last warning, Wilkes." The standoff might have escalated if Adam hadn't appeared at that moment, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. "Problem here?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual as he positioned himself beside Felicity. Wilkes straightened, bravado faltering slightly in the face of Adam's cold stare. "Just having a friendly chat with your housekeeper." "Mrs. Lawson is my business manager," Adam corrected, emphasizing her title, "and any business she has in town is her own." Wilkes smirked. "That what they call it these days? Business?" Adam's movement was so swift that Felicity barely registered it before he had Wilkes pinned against the wall of the building, forearm pressed against the man's throat. "You will apologize to the lady," Adam said quietly, his voice all the more menacing for its restraint. "And then you will never speak to her or about her again. Are we clear?" Wilkes's face purpled, partly from Adam's pressure on his windpipe, partly from humiliation. "Sorry," he choked out. Adam released him, stepping back with contempt. "We're leaving now. Hank, make sure the men are ready." As they walked away, Felicity could feel the stares of townsfolk who had witnessed the confrontation. Shame heated her cheeks despite her innocence. "Don't let him bother you," Adam said quietly as they collected their horses. "Men like Wilkes can't conceive of treating women with respect, so they assume no one else does either." Felicity nodded, but the incident had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "Is that what everyone thinks? That I'm that we're?" Adam turned to her, his expression serious. "What matters is what we know to be true. You're an employee of the Diamond Q, same as Hank or Mrs. Caldwell." But as they rode out of Laramie, Felicity couldn't help wondering if that was all she was to him, just an employee. And why the thought of being nothing more left her feeling strangely hollow. The cattle drive back to the ranch was uneventful, but Felicity remained quiet, turning over the day's events in her mind. Adam respected her boundaries, riding close enough to converse but never crowding her, sensing her need for space to process her thoughts. It was nearly dusk when they crested the final hill overlooking the Diamond Q. The ranch lay peaceful in the valley below, windows glowing with welcoming light. For the first time since leaving Laramie, Felicity felt herself relax. "It looks like home, doesn't it?" Adam said softly, noticing her expression. "Yes," she admitted. "It does." He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good, because it is your home, Felicity, for as long as you want it to be." The summer passed in a blur of activity. Under Felicity's careful management, the ranch's books were organized into a model of efficiency. Adam's business correspondence was answered promptly. New markets for his cattle were explored, and profits began to rise steadily. But more significant than the professional changes were the personal ones. Without either of them quite acknowledging it, Adam and Felicity fell into a pattern that resembled courtship. They took meals together, rode the boundaries of the ranch on Sundays, and spent evenings in each other's company. The tear-stained letter remained in Felicity's dresser drawer, taken out less and less frequently as hope for finding Thomas dimmed, and her attachment to her new life strengthened. One evening in late August, they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. The air was sweet with the scent of hay and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. "I received a letter from Chicago today," Adam said, breaking a comfortable silence. the rail lines expanding. By next spring, we'll be able to ship cattle directly from Laramie instead of driving them to Cheyenne. Felicity nodded, making mental calculations of the savings in time and manpower. That's excellent news. It should increase our profit margin significantly. Adam glanced at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Our profit margin, Felicity blushed, realizing her slip. I meant the ranch's profit margin, of course. I like our better, he said quietly. She looked at him, uncertain of his meaning. Adam, he turned in his chair to face her fully. These past months having you here, it's changed things, Felicity, changed me. Her heart began to beat faster. How so? Before you came, the ranch was just a place I built, work that needed doing. His voice was low, intense. Now it feels like something more, like a home, like a future. Felicity hardly dared breathe, afraid to hope that his words meant what she thought they might. I'm not good with fancy speech, Adam continued, reaching out to take her hand. But I know what I feel. I care for you, Felicity, more than as a friend or employee. Joy surged through her, bright and overwhelming. I care for you too, she whispered. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Felicity answered it with a certainty that surprised her, her hand rising to cup his cheek as she leaned into his embrace. When they finally parted, Adam rested his forehead against hers. I won't rush you, he promised. You've been through too much to be pushed into anything. Felicity smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I'm not being pushed, Adam. If anything, I've been waiting for you to catch up. He laughed then, the sound rich and full in the twilight. Is that so, Mrs. Caldwell has been laying odds with Hank about when you'd finally speak up, she admitted, enjoying his look of surprise. I believe she just won $2. That interfering old, Adam began, then shook his head ruefully. I suppose I've been transparent. Only to those with eyes, Felicity teased, feeling bold in her newfound happiness. Later that night, alone in her room, Felicity took out the tear-stained letter. The paper was fragile now, the ink fading in places where her tears had fallen. For months, it had been her talisman, her connection to a past that seemed increasingly remote. She read it one last time, tracing her finger over the words that had once contained all her despair. Then carefully, she folded it and placed it in her jewelry box, not discarding it, but no longer needing to clutch it like a lifeline. For the first time since Edward's death, since the auction block and all that followed, Felicity allowed herself to think of the future with hope instead of fear. The courtship that followed was conducted with propriety but genuine affection. Adam was attentive but never possessive, mindful of giving Felicity the independence she valued. For her part, Felicity blossomed in the security of his regard, her natural warmth and intelligence finding full expression in the life they were building together. In October, as the aspen trees turned gold against the deep green of the pines, Adam proposed formally during a picnic beside the river that ran through the ranch. The ring he offered had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. It's not diamonds or rubies, he apologized, watching anxiously as she examined it. If you'd prefer something grander, it's perfect, Felicity interrupted, slipping it onto her finger. Absolutely perfect. They were married in November, a small ceremony in the Laramie church with Mrs. Caldwell, Hank, and the ranch hands in attendance. Felicity wore a dress of deep blue silk that Adam had ordered special from Denver, with a spray of late wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Adam kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, not tears of sorrow like those that had stained her letter, but tears of joy for a future once unimaginable. The Diamond Q thrived under their joint stewardship. Adam's strength and vision combined with Felicity's business acumen created a ranch known throughout the territory for its quality stock and fair dealings. They expanded operations, buying adjacent land when it became available, diversifying into horses as well as cattle. In the spring of 1878, Felicity discovered she was expecting their first child. Adam's reaction stunned disbelief, followed by such exuberant joy that he lifted her off her feet and spun her around the kitchen became a favorite story among the ranch hands. "Put me down this instant, Adam Quincy," Felicity had demanded, laughing despite her attempt at sternness. "This is exactly how we got into this situation in the first place, Mrs. Caldwell, witnessing the scene, had merely rolled her eyes and muttered about having another child to raise, though her delight in the coming baby was evident in the stream of tiny knitted garments that began to appear. Their son, Thomas Edward Quincy, was born on a crisp October morning as the first snow dusted the distant mountains. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, and from his first lusty cry, it was clear he had inherited the strong will of both parents. Adam held his son with reverent amazement. "He's perfect," he whispered, looking from the baby to Felicity with eyes suspiciously bright. "You're both perfect." Felicity, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband cradle their child. "I named him for my brother," she said softly. "And for Edward, who despite his faults brought me to Wyoming, which led me to you." Adam nodded, understanding her need to honor the connections that had shaped her path. "Thomas Edward Quincy," he said, testing the name. "It's a good, strong name for a boy who'll grow up on this land." The telegrams they'd sent inquiring after Thomas Lawson had never received replies. Over time, Felicity had come to accept that her brother might never be found. But in naming her son for him, she kept that connection alive, a thread linking past to future. Life settled into a new rhythm with young Thomas, or Teddy, as he was quickly nicknamed at its center. The ranch continued to prosper, and the Quincy family with it. Adam and Felicity worked side by side, partners in every sense, their initial employer-employee relationship almost forgotten in the depth of the bond they'd forged. It was a Saturday morning in the summer of 1880 when the unexpected visitor arrived. Felicity was in the garden with 2-year-old Teddy, showing him how to pick ripe strawberries without crushing them, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. A lone rider was coming down the road to the ranch house, a stranger, from his unfamiliar silhouette. Instinctively, Felicity gathered Teddy closer, wary despite the relative safety of the diamond queue. As the rider drew nearer, something about his posture, the way he sat his horse, tugged at her memory. He was tall and lean, with dark hair beneath his dusty hat, and he rode with the slightly formal bearing of someone not born to the saddle. "Hello, the house," the rider called, reining in at a respectful distance. "I'm looking for Felicity Lawson." At the sound of his voice, Felicity's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead at double speed. It couldn't be. After all this time, it couldn't possibly be. "Thomas," she called back, her voice breaking on the name. "Thomas Lawson." The rider dismounted in a fluid motion and removed his hat, revealing a face older and more weathered than she remembered, but unmistakably her brother's. "Felicity," he breathed, staring at her as though he couldn't quite believe his eyes. "My God, it really is you." She ran to him then, Teddy balanced on her hip, tears streaming down her face. Thomas met her halfway, enfolding both her and the child in an embrace that spoke of years of searching and hoping. "How did you find me?" she asked when she could finally speak. "We sent telegrams everywhere. I only just saw them," Thomas explained, drawing back to look at her properly. "I've been in the Colorado silver mines these past 2 years, barely able to keep body and soul together. When I finally struck a decent vein and made it back to civilization, there was a stack of messages waiting at the assay office. He glanced down at Teddy, who was regarding him with solemn curiosity. "And who is this young gentleman, my son?" Felicity said proudly. "Thomas Edward Quincy. We call him Teddy." Her brother's eyebrows rose at the surname. "Quincy? Then you're married." "Happily so," came Adam's voice from behind them. He had ridden in from the north pasture and dismounted silently, watching the reunion unfold. Now he stepped forward, extending his hand. "Adam Quincy. You must be Thomas Lawson." Thomas clasped his hand firmly. "I am, and I've been searching for my sister for nearly 4 years." "Then you'll have a lot to catch up on," Adam said with a smile. "Starting with dinner, Mrs. Caldwell will skin us all alive if we let it get cold." Over a meal that stretched late into the evening, Thomas shared the story of his journey west, the initial hope of quick riches in California, the harsh reality of the goldfields, the move to Colorado when rumors of silver strikes drew prospectors east again. He'd written to Felicity's last known address in Laramie several times, but by then she'd already been dispossessed by Edward's creditors. "When I couldn't find you, I feared the worst," he admitted, cradling a cup of coffee as they sat before the fire. "The territories can be unkind to women alone." Felicity exchanged a glance with Adam. "I wasn't always so fortunate," she said quietly, and proceeded to tell her brother about Edward's debts, the auction block, and Adam's intervention. Thomas listened with increasing dismay, his knuckles white around his coffee cup. "If I had known. If I had been there." "But you weren't," Adam said, not unkindly, and dwelling on what might have been serves no purpose. Felicity reached across to touch her brother's hand. "What matters is that we've found each other now. And that good came from bad. I have Adam and Teddy, the ranch, a life I love." Later, after Thomas had been shown to the guest room and Teddy put to bed, Felicity joined Adam on the porch. The summer night was warm, crickets singing in the tall grass beyond the yard. "Are you happy he's here?" Adam asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Beyond words," Felicity replied, leaning into his embrace. "It feels like the final piece falling into place, as if now, truly, all the goodbyes have been answered with hellos." Adam smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Your letter, the one you were holding when I first saw you, do you still have it?" "Yes," she said, surprised by the question. "It's in my jewelry box." "Why?" "I was thinking," he said slowly, "that perhaps we should frame it as a reminder of how our story began." Felicity considered this. The tear-stained letter had been a symbol of all she'd lost, written in a moment of despair when the future seemed bleakest. Yet without it, without the auction block where Adam had first seen her clutching it, their paths might never have crossed. "Yes," she decided, "I'd like that. Not to dwell on the past, but to honor the journey that brought us here." The following morning, Felicity retrieved the letter from her jewelry box. As she and Adam carefully mounted it in a simple wooden frame, Thomas watched with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. "I never received it," he said quietly, "but I feel as though I'm finally answering it by being here." The framed letter was hung in the study where Felicity still managed the ranch's books, a reminder not of loss, but of resilience and the unexpected ways fate could turn sorrow to joy. Thomas stayed for a month, getting to know his nephew and developing a genuine respect for Adam. When he finally announced his intention to return to Colorado, it was with a promise to visit regularly and a standing invitation for them to visit his new silver claim. "I've named it the Felicity Mine," he told his sister as they said their goodbyes, "because finding you again has been my greatest stroke of fortune." Life at the Diamond Q continued to flourish. The following year, Felicity gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose. in honor of Adam's lost sister and the flower that had been Felicity's mother's favorite. The little girl had her mother's chestnut hair and her father's determined spirit, and from the moment of her arrival, she had Teddy's devoted protection. The ranch expanded further, becoming one of the most prosperous in the territory. Adam and Felicity's partnership, both personal and professional, was remarked upon throughout Wyoming as a model of what could be achieved when husband and wife worked as true equals. Thomas visited twice yearly, always bringing gifts for the children and news of his increasingly successful mining ventures. On one such visit, in the summer of 1885, he brought a guest, a widow named Catherine he'd met in Denver, whose quiet intelligence and warm humor had captured his heart. By Christmas, they were engaged, and the following spring they were married in a ceremony at the Diamond Q, with Teddy serving proudly as ring bearer and 7-year-old Elizabeth scattering wildflower petals before the bride. Did you ever imagine this? Adam asked Felicity as they watched the newlyweds depart for their honeymoon. When you were writing that letter, did you ever dream of such happiness? Felicity shook her head, leaning against her husband's solid strength. Never. I thought I was writing an ending, not a beginning. Adam's arm tightened around her waist. I meant what I said that first day, when I told you you'd write no more goodbyes. She smiled up at him, her heart full. The best promise anyone ever kept. As the years passed, the framed letter remained on the wall of the study, the ink fading gradually, the paper yellowing with age. New generations of Quincy's grew up hearing the story of how their family began the tear-stained letter, the auction block, the cowboy who recognized in a desperate woman's eyes the same pain he carried in his own heart. Teddy took over management of the ranch when Adam and Felicity semi-retired, though they remained active in ranch affairs well into their 70s. Elizabeth, who inherited her mother's head for business, established the first bank in Laramie to be partly owned by a woman. Together, Adam and Felicity watched Wyoming grow from territory to state, saw the frontier gradually tamed by railroads and telegraph lines, witnessed the turn of a new century from the porch of the home they'd built together. And through it all, through joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, they remained what they had become on that long-ago day when a tear-stained letter changed the course of both their lives, partners, friends, lovers, each other's safe harbor in a world of uncertainty. When visitors to the Diamond Q asked about the framed, faded letter in the study, Felicity would smile and say simply, "It was meant to be a goodbye. It became a beginning instead." And Adam, his blue eyes still bright in his weathered face, would add with quiet certainty, "Some stories aren't meant to end with goodbyes." On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Adam presented Felicity with a small, leather-bound book. Inside, in his careful handwriting, was their story from the auction block to the present day. "So they'll remember," he said softly, just for her ears. "Long after we're gone, they'll know how much we loved each other." Felicity, her chestnut hair now silver but her eyes as bright as ever, touched the book reverently. "They'll remember," she agreed. "But more importantly, they'll understand that sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the first page of a much better story." That night, as they had for 50 years, Adam and Felicity Quincy stood on the porch of the Diamond Q, watching the stars appear over the Wyoming hills. The ranch was larger now, modernized in many ways, but the essence of it remained unchanged, a place built on hard work, mutual respect, and abiding love. "No regrets?" Adam asked, taking her hand as he had thousands of times before. Felicity's fingers twined with his, the gold wedding band worn smooth with the passage of decades. "Not one," she replied. "Every tear on that letter led me here to you. How could I regret that?" Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the velvet sky, not an ending, but a beginning. Not a goodbye, but a promise kept.